I'm also an expert in environmental issues, and I have a consulting practice in climate education and strategy consulting called IT Climate Ed. I'm also one of the core member of a nonprofit organization called Rebit Network, which is an IoT open source project to deploy CO2 sensors. And I'm also a part of the TerraDo, fellow of the TerraDo climate program. So I'm going to go over several topics today. One of them is to understand really what is the problem and about around data center energy efficiency. Why is it so important? And then we'll go over some strategies to optimize this energy usage in cloud data centers. And then I'll go over some case studies, several examples, and we'll do some Q&A, and then I'll wrap up. So I'll start with somewhat of a provocative question. Are data centers in the context of climate a threat or an opportunity? So on one hand, climate tech solutions benefit from a lot of the impact of data centers, which are really powering the internet, including the ability to do predictions, the ability to manage risk, forecasting, even directly related to data centers. We have energy optimization and automation, which are really run through software that are hosted in data centers. On the other hand, the total energy consumption of data center was about 3.6% last year, according to the International Energy Agency of the global electricity production. So this is a pretty significant share. And also right now, we see that the cloud data center usage and consumption is really following an exponential growth, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. So yeah, so data center traffic has increased 15 times since 2010, and the demand for cloud data center is still increasing. So I just wanted to emphasize that this demand is driven by a number of technologies. One of them is artificial intelligence. We have also IoT, 5G, virtual reality, and even crypto that are all driving demand for cloud data centers. And you see that curve, on the right side is sort of following that trend. But on the other hand, the data center energy use has not increased that much because energy efficiency has improved as well over the years, pretty significantly. And we'll see for the number of reasons, it has improved, but it has also plateaued to a certain point right now where we need additional breakthrough to really move to additional energy efficiency. So why is it such an important topic? So right now, people could argue that cloud providers, they use clean energy to power their data centers. And so why worry about the fact that they use more energy, because it's all solar powered and it doesn't have any impact on greenhouse gas emissions. However, up until still today, they are still using what we call renewable energy certificates, which allows them to purchase clean energy contracts to utility providers. And the fact that they're called unbundled, it means that they don't have to be tied to a particular data center, and they can be essentially aggregated over the period of 1 year and over a number of geographies. And so the way that cloud providers such as Amazon and Google and Microsoft are claiming that they have already achieved net zero emissions with their data center emissions, and are almost carbon negative, is because they use this accounting trick of essentially aggregating all the renewable energy credits that they purchase and saying that this is essentially their impact on greenhouse gas emissions. In reality, obviously, it's something that's not that clean, because in some spaces there are actually the data centers in many regions are powered still by fossil fuel. And so if you look at the actual energy consumption per data center and per hour, which is the other component, the time component, then obviously we're pretty far from having what we call a 24/7 clean energy consumption for cloud providers. So that means that really decreasing that energy and being more efficient in how energy is consumed to power data centers is very important. So here, one of the aspects of climate change that's impacting data center providers is that the fact that extreme weather events are becoming more prominent, and they are impacting the operation of data centers themselves. And you see on the right, like news from the BBC that came from last year, that data centers in the UK were forced to shut down, at least for Google and Oracle, because of the heat wave. The cooling systems couldn't keep up. So they do have to pay attention to these as well. There are also government government actually mandates that are coming up, driven right now by the European Union. There is an efficiency directive coming up into effect in March 2024 that's going to touch both on energy and water consumption, and that's going to require data centers, data center providers of a certain size to report on their consumption. The other aspect of it is that the fact that energy usage correlates to additional energy costs for the data center operators is definitely an incentive for them to try to keep these costs down. Otherwise, they will have to pass this on to their customers. And this is definitely, they're trying not to do that. And finally, very important to mention as well, Moore's law. So I don't know if you're familiar with Moore's law, but it's the premise that every couple of years, the computing power of transistors is going to double. And right now, everybody is sort of agreeing that Moore's law is coming to an end, so the performance cannot increase indefinitely. But right now, the next challenge is really to balance that high performance with, how to keep the really high performance of computing power with low energy consumption. So this is really right now the key questions for all the vendors, the IT vendors. And this is very relevant for the chip vendors like NVIDIA or Intel or AMD. So everybody is probably quite often familiar with, checking the weather online, and weather.com is one of the big websites providing weather information. It might not be the one you're using, but it's owned by IBM and hosted in an IBM data center. And right now, the amount of data that's processed by this website, the weather.com, is 400 terabytes per day, which is pretty significant if you consider this is just one website. And obviously in the back end, there is a lot of processes and data information in the back. But this is just to give you an idea that things are, we're talking about really, really large amount of data. And if you look at an average data center, large data center, it uses about 100 megawatts in terms of capacity. And this is the equivalent of powering 80,000 homes in the US. And there are many, many of these large data centers worldwide, and we'll go over the numbers. They're called hyperscale data center, and we'll go over those numbers a little bit more in details during the course of this presentation. So what is the typical data center layout? And here, it's just for you, for if you're not completely familiar with the world of data centers, it's nice to have an idea of how things work together. So the one that's people probably know about are the server rooms. And this is sort of a scaled down version of that, because these server rooms can be huge. Think of it typically as a couple of large Costco stores. If you're familiar with Costco, large retail stores put together. So 2 football fields maybe of the size of just these server rooms. And they're typically clusters of racks of equipments, all interconnected. And all these racks of equipment are powered by, they have generators and UPS powers to bring the energy to them, as well as, and then there is the cooling system, which is a significant part of a data center. And you see here that you have AC units that are controlling the temperature and making sure that it remains cool, because this service generates a lot of heat as they operate. And then we have on the top of the data center roof, so this cooling system usually arise on a raised floor. So it's everything is on a raised floor, so they rise from the bottom. The cool air circulates from the bottom and then is exhausted out on the roof. So you have these heat exchangers, which are big towers on the roof of those data centers. And then, of course, you have your network operations centers, but very few people usually are needed to operate those data centers. Large data centers can be operated with as little as 30 people. So just to give you even a more concrete idea of what it looks like for a traditional air conditioning unit, which is also called mechanical cooling. And we'll talk more in depth about better technologies that are going to be used to improve the efficiency of those. But you have these large compressors, and you're probably familiar with those if you have AC at home. And then the air circulation and exhausts that are all on the top. And then at the bottom, you have the influx of air that comes into the server rooms. And these, just to mention that these AC systems are not only quite energy, they demand a lot of energy in terms of powering them, but they also use CFCs, which are themselves a greenhouse gas that's bad for, that's considered a pollutant, as well as when it emits in the air, it's actually also contributing to global warming. And they are also, they can be also water intensive in terms of their uses. So many different, many drawbacks, and this is sort of I would say an older technology that is still in use, still prevalent across all data centers. So before we talk about more about efficiency of data center, it's important to introduce an acronym called PUE, Power Usage Effectiveness, that most data center operators use to measure the effectiveness of data centers. And essentially, it's the total facility power generation divided by the IT equipment power. And ideally, you would want all the facility power, all the power used to power the facility to be used to power the IT equipment, because this is really the ultimate usage of the data center. And so one is sort of the ideal scenario. It's never going to be, perfectly one, because there are some subsequent, powers that are required for equipment that are within a data center, like lights and etc. But it's as close as possible to one is what we're trying to achieve. So the PUE has increased, has gone down significantly over the last 15 years. And that's why you saw earlier on that slide, the curve of the energy usage of data centers not going up that much, because we're able to increase significantly this PUE by better managing the layout of the equipment, and also by the fact that the equipment itself has become more energy efficient, Energy Star compliant. The chip also has become more energy efficient. And so we're able now to achieve, in average, 1.57 PUE, which means still that this 0.57 it means that about 60% of the energy used in a data center is essentially used to something else than powering the IT equipment. And so it's a big overhead. And to cut down on that overhead, which is mostly due to cooling, you will have to achieve essentially better technologies to cool down the data center. So now I'm going to discuss specifically about those strategies to optimize energies in cloud data centers. And there are about 7 of them. I'll be spending a bit more time on some of them than others due to the interest of this presentation. But I will try to cover as much ground as possible. One of them I already touched on, which was the hardware efficiency, and I won't be covering that too much in depth, but some technologies like SSD storage and also the improvement of chips in terms of how much energy they use has helped quite a bit, and is still something that's ongoing research from all the vendors that are providing the IT equipment that are in use in the data center. That's one of these items. The other ones I'm going to spend a bit more time in terms of going in depth. So the first one is you cannot really improve what you can't measure. And so the first aspect of these data center operation improvements is to be able to measure pretty comprehensively how much power and how efficient is your power being used to power your IT equipment. And so the measurement is typically done using sensors that are located throughout the server rooms to measure not just temperature, but also humidity, which is very important, as well as airflow. And then all this information is being fed into what we call the DCIM, or Data Center Information Management Software. And this software has many different, several components and several goals. One of them is just to have an inventory of everything that you have in the data center, including all the racks and servers and their positioning within the data center room, as well as all the power and cooling aspects. And then it can also provide you an analysis based on the input of the sensor data of your power efficiency, and that it can do also at based on the system at the near real time, in a near real time way. And then it can also help with upgrades, so regular upgrades, as well as failure prediction, and also perform capacity planning to help you figure out, based on your needs and your growth, how much you need to reduce or add in terms of capacity. So these are important part of the data center operation, and they can help you achieve then goals of improving the efficiency of those data centers. So one of the trend that we've been observing in the last few years is that data centers have been growing bigger and bigger, have been consolidating. And right now, we have about 7,500 data centers globally, and about 600 of those are considered hyperscale data centers, which are essentially large data centers that are larger than 5,000 servers, and that are typically owned by cloud providers, but not only. Many of them are also operated by governments as well as large tech companies. And actually, the largest in the world is in China, and it's about 100,000 servers. So just to give you a scale, these are huge data centers. And each one of them runs at about 100 megawatt capacity on average, although the largest one will be probably definitely north of that. And why is it so interesting to have large data centers? So one of them is that you benefit from economies of scale. And as a result, you are able to implement pretty innovative and innovative energy powering systems at a lower cost. And that's one of the big aspects. Another one is that if they're designed correctly, you can have a modular architecture that allows you to fine-tune the capacity and more specifically, maybe the cooling capacity of those data centers. And then there's also the leverage that especially large data providers have with utility companies to not just locate their data center next to clean power generation source, but also have the ability to influence these the utility companies to actually build clean energy projects next to their data centers. So it goes actually both ways. And another pointer that I wanted to mention is the Open Compute project, which touches on many of those design aspects and it's not just data center, but it's also at the server level, at the cooling level, and they have work groups that are working on a regular basis to publish white papers and also encourage innovation across the industry. So now I want to spend a few minutes talking about cooling. So just to reiterate our discussion about PUEs, about 50% of the energy that usage in a data center is really all about cooling the data center. And there are strategies to decrease that number. And one of the first one that seems fairly obvious is why not using natural airflow, assuming that you're in a climate that's not too hot. Think of data centers that are in the Scandinavia, like the Norway or Denmark or Sweden. And these, data center typically benefit from a cooler weather year-round. So data center providers have been looking at how to maximize the benefits of this cooler air, outside air, as an input to the data center server room. However, it does have some limitations, and one of them is that the air can be too humid, or it's also, it doesn't have obviously a constant temperature. It will have a very variable temperature. And also it will maybe have pollutant or particles that are not good for the servers. And so it has to be filtered and cleaned up. So it does have really serious limitations, but this is one technology that's available in some geographies. One approach, I would say. And the next one is a bit more involved, and this is called evaporative cooling. And this is the same concept as how your body uses perspiration to actually cool down. So when you sweat, your skin emits water, the water drops, and this allows your body to cool down. It's really all about having hot air flowing through a pad that's constantly humid with water, and essentially taking the hot energy out of the air and resulting in cooler air. And it does have also some limitation. One of them is that it does use a lot of water, which is problematic in many areas that are drought prone. And the other one is that it does have some limitation in terms of the amount of energy it consumes. And then the next technology that's a bit more, I would say, advanced is this what we call two-phase immersion cooling, which is instead of having the air being cold, the servers themselves are immersed in a liquid. And as such, they are cooled down and they're always immersed in the liquid. And the problem with this, so it's a good way, once you are able to implement that in your data center, it does have many benefits in terms of the energy reduction and efficiency. However, it's a bit more costly and also not as easy to implement in existing data centers. And finally, I would mention a project that's even more advanced, which is why not having a data center? So in this case, a mini, small version of a data center, like the picture you see on the right side, and put it underwater. So to benefit from the fact that you have always, underwater in a cooler area, like here of Scotland, the Sea of Scotland, you always have cooler water and a fairly stable environment, because in this tank that you see here, the servers are actually immersed also themselves in a liquid. And it's an experiment that was run by Microsoft over the last few years, and that has proven to be pretty effective, obviously only for small versions of edge data center, but this one was powered by wind energy. And it resulted also in very stable conditions, because believe it or not, humans are very disruptive to the data center environment in terms of mistakes that can be made and cable that can be unplugged. And in this case, the data center was completely undisturbed because nobody was there. And so, and they were able to remotely access it through a fiber connection to the land. And the results were pretty positive. So they're going to try to see if they could implement more projects like that. So another aspect that I'd like to touch on is the usage optimization of the hardware. So a traditional data center is usually built for the worst case scenario, which is called peak power usage, which means that there is reserve capacity for maintenance as well as redundancy. And this reserve capacity is really a way to obviously have very good SLAs, service level objectives, but on the other hand, it's really stranding the power and having dormant units all the time that are powered on. And so the strategy to minimize that power is really to figure out if you can both keep your SLA that are required from your customer and that are expected by your customers, as well as have an intelligent understanding of virtual machine allocation so that you can use that dormant power based on power demand and allocate these redundant servers that are not in use based on with some virtual workloads when you have peak power demands. And this an IEEE study that was recently published has proved that this strategy they've been able to increase the number of deployed server by 33%, which is pretty significant. So the other strategy is around software optimization. And here we're talking about strategies that have been implemented for quite a while, starting with virtualization. So instead of having dedicated standalone servers that are having to host one application and operating system, you can have now hundreds of virtual machines running on that server hardware unit. And then further, you had additional technologies that were going along the same way of increasing density, container technology, then serverless technologies, spot instances, that all contributed to maximizing usage of application workloads in a given server hardware container. And then now you have new projects, notably with Kubernetes technology, to be able to schedule jobs based on clean energy availability. So now you have some kind of awareness of the clean energy and the demand on clean energy. So for instance, solar energy will be more available during the daytime, and wind energy will be more on the nighttime and evening time. And you can look at what is the priority of the jobs that you need to schedule. And if it's a lower priority, maybe it can wait and schedule the high priority jobs when you have more clean energy. So there are ways to do that with container technology, specifically container management technologies such as Kubernetes. And then there is also an aspect of oversubscription that's similar to what we talked about in the previous slide, with hardware being sort of reserved for maintenance or for redundancy. And here also sometimes we have the same problem with software. And here we can use artificial intelligence to predict when the additional virtual machines could be deployed, and again, diminish and decrease this oversubscription problem. And finally, there is an interesting project from the Green Software Foundation that has been offering an open source SDK that allows you to build what they call carbon-aware workloads that when you develop software, so this is really more for software developers, you have this sort of plugin to essentially optimize your workload placement based on clean energy availability. And so you decrease the carbon footprint of your workload. So I would like to cover now a few cloud provider initiatives. And I'm not going to go over all the cloud providers out there, but I wanted to highlight maybe two of them that have been sort of at the forefront of energy efficiencies and decreasing the energy consumption of their data center. And these are Google and Microsoft. So Google in particular, they started what we now call the Clean Energy Initiative, 24/7 Clean Energy Initiative, which is now a UN initiative that has other companies that have joined, including Microsoft. And this is really targeted at addressing the issues of unbundling the unbundled renewable energy credits, which, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, are just not properly accounting for the actual energy usage and energy source of each data center at a given time. And so right now, as of today, Google data center are about 66%, so 2/3 covered. It was actually in 2021, but that's the latest number I could get. And they're aiming to be fully covered, I think, by 2030, and aligned to this new practice. They've also been able to, in average, reduce the cooling spend of their data center. And now they're, instead of being 60%, which is the industry average, now they're down to 10%, which is pretty close to optimal. And then they've been also pretty active in using artificial intelligence to adjust the distribution of energy over time, and essentially account for peak demand as well as lower demand, and not have a sort of a uniform energy input to the data center. So Microsoft on their end have also been able to achieve similar energy reduction of their data center, energy efficiency. They also want their data center to be LEED Gold certified, so it's not just the data center energy power, but also how do you build the data center themselves? So what kind of concrete are you going to use, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of consideration beyond just the energy of the data center. And they also have been very innovative with a technology I mentioned, which is this two-phased liquid immersion cooling in a production environment. So this is still pretty new technology where you immerse the servers in liquid instead of having air cooling. I mentioned about the underseas data center pilot, and they've also have a project with a hydrogen-powered data center. So Greenville, Oregon. So this is a high desert town sort of in middle eastern Oregon in the US, west coast of the US, but not close to the coast, more in a sort of a high desert plateau. So think of it as, in terms of climate, as very hot and dry in the summer. And you would actually ask, why would several data center providers have chosen that area? So first, it's, they had huge tax incentives to deploy there from the state of Oregon. Also, land was very cheap. So it's definitely a cost, there are cost reasons. And they were able also to get, so it's not just, actually, by the way, it's not just Facebook or Meta, but also Apple has also deployed several data centers there. And it's also the fact that there are proximity to wind farms and solar farms that help to source the power, clean power from those for those specific locations. So just for the Meta, so we're talking about 11 data centers, which are all hyperscale data centers, so 1 million square feet. Even though they're powered by wind and solar, for the most part, it's still not enough in terms of local power. So Meta is purchasing, and Apple as well, renewable energy certificates to offset essentially the remaining. Meta is very active with the Open Compute project, and they've been using newer technologies like evaporative cooling, humidification to improve the efficiency of these data centers. And they're able to achieve not only pretty good PUE of 1.09, so essentially only 10% overhead, but also water usage efficiency. And as you can imagine, in a high desert, water is at a premium. And so they have to be very careful about their water consumption. Just to give you an idea, each data center is using 1.3 million gallons of water per day. And this water is coming from the aquifer. So they're using recycling and trying to circle back several times the water to maximize its efficiency. And talking about recycling, there are several ways actually that data center operators have been trying to figure out what to do with both the water and the heat that are generated out of the data center as a sort of an output. And one of the interesting aspects has been to heat public swimming pools. And these are for data centers that are located in more urban areas. And actually in the UK, there've been an initiative for that. Another aspect was even be for home heating. And this is an initiative that was done in Scandinavia, I believe in Sweden. And then other aspects in more rural areas are for greenhouses, so to heat greenhouses, and even using water for field irrigations. So just to wrap up about the different strategies that are being studied, one of them would seem a bit of a science fiction strategy, which is why not using a data center that is onboarded a satellite orbiting around the Earth and obviously fully powered, just like any satellite, by solar power. And this is actually not science fiction, but this is something that's seriously being studied by both the European Union and even NASA as a way, again, to alleviate this energy draw on land resources. However, obviously, you can imagine that there are several problems with this. First of all, there is the carbon footprint of just launching those satellites in orbit right now, which is pretty significant, even if they're bundled together on a big rocket. And then there is the problem of maintenance. So if something breaks, how do you repair it? These are two issues, and I'm not even including potentially space waste, which is another big topic that is being talked about. So now I'd like to just wrap it up with a few Q&A. We have a few more minutes. So I don't know if anyone has a question.
Pascal, this is Reed. Thank you for this presentation. Really like it. When you say these big data centers are buying renewable energy credits, are they trying to match the time of day generation of that renewable energy with the 24/7 usage of power? You know what I'm trying to say? To be really truly net zero 724 is different than just buying energy credits.
Right. So it's very different. Yeah. And it's a good question. So up until recently, they didn't care if it was geographically co-located with the data center or if it was matched with the time itself. It was all aggregated on a global basis as well as a yearly basis. So you can imagine that you could have one clean data center in the US and then something that's powered by coal in maybe Asia Pacific, but at the end of the day, when you all add it up, everything is zero, right? So the trend now, and this is the initiative that has been led by Google and followed by Microsoft, is to try to be more rigorous about it and to be mindful that to truly achieve net zero, or as their net zero commitment, they cannot cheat and do an accounting trick, but instead they have to really power their specific data center at the location itself by clean energy. So either by connecting directly to a clean energy, wind farm or solar farm, or by purchasing or sponsoring a project, which is also what they've been doing, essentially enabling a new power plant from a utility provider, and essentially paying for it. So paying forward, essentially. So sponsoring it and sponsoring the building of that clean power plant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, but that's a good question. Yeah.
Pascal Lockraper, great presentation. Thank you for taking the time to share that with us. I had a question just in general about how data center operators, owners think about capital investments related to sort of trying to reduce energy or water usage. What is the sort of time frame that they typically think in terms of? For instance, if you had a piece of equipment or a solution that could return, pay back in say 2 years, water reduction, electricity reduction, emissions reduction, is that interesting in your experience to those operators, or is that too long, or how would they think about something that?
Yeah, so that's a good question also, and it relates to sort of the commitment that many of the big companies behind these data centers are making publicly and pushing for, because at the end of the day, they're the one who are sort of being accountable to the public and to their customers about these commitments. And so they're going to, right now, the time frame seemed to be always like 2050, so far in the future. Now it's more 2030, and some of them are even talking about 2025. So this is like tomorrow, right?
Right.
So now we're talking about more of a medium to even short-term type of investment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there's also, again, the pressure from European Union that not only you have to claim something, but you have to report on it, which is, again, quite different. So report means you have to be audited maybe by somebody, a third party who's going to verify that what you say as
Sure.
a PUE or water usage efficiency is actually what it is. And so this is becoming obviously a much bigger deal, but it's going to take a while to retrofit, a lot of the 7,000 or so data center in the world.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about, a horizon that's, hopefully that's going to happen within the 2030, I would say, timeline. I would say that some regions, it's not uniform across the world, right? You have some regions that are way behind and some others that are ahead in terms of the availability of clean power, as well as the means that they have to upgrade those data centers.
Got it.
Any other questions?
Maybe just piggybacking on that last one, I'm
Yep.
just thinking, does it make more sense to build new, if it's dependent on the green energy? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to weigh, like, would it make more sense to just put something in a place that made more sense, or consolidate in some of these areas, or what are those factors that go into it versus retrofitting?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question. For now, the trend has been mostly to consolidate, and that's why we're talking about those hyperscale data centers. On the other hand, there's actually another trend, which is called edge data centers, which is related to edge computing and doing, essentially performing the computing and the processing of the computing as close as possible to the requester. And that means using smaller footprint data centers, like the one that Microsoft have been building underseas. and generally speaking, obviously, you would always think that building new would enable you to have all those brand new technologies that you can benefit from. But I think the idea is that in order to be, realistically, we're going to see technologies that can take advantage of retrofit versus building new, because of all the considerations of, building a new data center still takes years, right? It's not something that you do. It's a big large infrastructure project, and so not including the land investment, etc. So I would say that there is going to be hopefully a lot of technologies that are going to be involving retrofit in the near future.
What's happening with Amazon? I didn't see that mentioned
Yeah,
here. I saw Google and Microsoft.
I know. I didn't mention them. They have been actually a bit less transparent in terms of their sustainability effort on the data center front. So it's also about the information that they are willing to publish about it. I'm sure they're doing a lot as well, but they're not as forefront to lead or be participant in public initiatives and open source initiatives like Google and Microsoft. And so they are definitely the largest one. I think they in terms of market share, it's 50% still of all the data centers are to power AWS for the cloud provider, I mean. And still, and they're probably mindful of that because they have the same incentive to reduce their energy cost as the other cloud providers. They're just not as transparent, I would say. And in terms of transparency, I would say Microsoft is the one that right now is the most transparent in terms of everything that they're doing in that space.
There are two questions in the chat. I would be interested in hearing.
Yeah. Let me just go over those. Okay, so do you have any sense of how data center, so this is a question from Lok. Do you have any sense of how data center operators typically think about capital investment? Oh, this is one, I think I answered this one. And do they tend to put a dollar value on emission savings? And I think this last part of the question is relating to maybe carbon pricing and the fact that more and more, I think the tendency is to not just consider the carbon emissions as a externality, but also report on it and consider that it has actually a real dollar value on the market, right? And so right now they're probably not doing that directly, but when it comes to associating it to cost savings, obviously there is actually, it's not just emission savings, but it's also energy and cost savings for them. So as we said, there's two factors, right? You have the fact that you want to use clean energy to power these data centers, and you have to make them more efficient so that they don't use more energy, regardless of it's clean or not, right? And so on the second aspect, obviously there is a dollar value because you spend less on your energy bills. So I'm just looking if there is any other questions. Oh, what impact do the underwater data centers have on the local underwater ecology? So that's right now, that's a good question. It's been right now done at such a small scale. As you say, it's like a big, it's like the size of a ship container, I would say. And that's, I don't think they've studied that enough to answer that question. Obviously, if you had hundreds of those, it could be problematic. Right now, if it's done at small scale, but I would say that definitely that could be a consideration in the future if it was done at scale. And I think that's about all the questions I had. So Just to wrap up, I wanted to mention that if you want to learn more about this topic or other topics, I'm always available for a 30-minute consultation, and I'll share the recording of the presentation as well as the slides to everyone who attended or registered. I also wanted to mention that I'm going to give another presentation on a related topic, which is e-waste and how do you manage the life cycle of your IT assets to minimize e-waste next week. It's going to be Thursday next week at 12 p.m. Pacific time. So I'll also send the link to register to that presentation to you guys. But thanks again for attending. I hope to that you can join me soon on other events. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Pascal.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.